Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of VFX Circle. I'm Hayley Miller, founder of Wild VFX Day. And today's special guest is Paul Nichols, who's co-founder of Factory 15. Hi, Paul.
Hello, Hayley.
Going into my podcast voice now. We just had a little chat. We've got quite a few questions to get through. So we'll kick straight off. But I do like to give listeners and viewers a little bit of a backstory in how we met. And it was at Mundos Digitales last year.
It was your first time, and I think my fourth after 15 years ago was my first one. So
yeah, and we both agree that it's one of our faves. A lot of fun and very insightful. So shout out to Mundos, and I'm sporting my Mundos water bottle, which I've had for over a year, and that is an achievement. I need to put that on my CV. So let's get into the questions. So today we'll go through a bit about your own personal journey. Obviously we'll dive into Factory 15 and some more general questions about the industry.
Sounds good.
So without further ado, let's get into your background. So fair to say, fairly unique start, considering where you are now in terms of your education. You studied architecture, got your degree and master's, I think, as well.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and your first few roles were in architecture. So how did you go from there to becoming creative director and co-founder of Factory 15?
Giving up a highly educated career in architecture to make cartoons, as my dad would say. That's literally what my dad said when I sort of transitioned, because I did spend 7 years studying and working in architecture. And I think I kind of fell into architecture because I didn't quite know what else to do. I was quite technical and I liked drawing and I was very artistic. And architecture, after studying a kind of art foundation, a design general foundation, architecture seemed like the best place for me. I always had a fascination with visual effects and animation. And I think my parents sort of dissuaded me from pursuing that kind of career. I remember my dad saying to me specifically, when we were watching like a Pixar movie or something, like, do you think you could do that better? And to like a 14, 15-year-old, the answer was no, all right, because it all seemed very intimidating at the time. And so that's why I kind of pursued slightly more technical design courses like architecture. And then it's funny that I kind of found myself full circle going back into that sort of industry quite organically. But yes, I met my co-founders studying architecture at the School of Architecture, where we specialized in filmmaking. And it sounds kind of like weirder than it really is. Instead of making models or drawings, we'd make films about our projects to communicate them. We'd still design spaces and build them in 3D, but the output was a narrative exploration of those design ideas rather than a static drawing or a model. But we were kind of encouraged to think about our designs in terms of political, technological, and cultural change. And those films were a bit disruptive at the time that we made, and our graduation films went viral on the internet, and we decided to start our own creative agency rather than go back to traditional architecture after the course finished. And that was this kind of decision we'd made even before we'd finished the course and even before those films got recognized online. So it was just lucky that the films did get recognized online, and it kind of expedited the process, really.
Yeah, I love that. So there was a bit of a eureka moment between you and your pals slash co-founders. Was it a classic a night in a pub, or was it a bit more?
I don't know if there was one kind of moment. I think we just had this real synergy between the six of us at the time that were studying on the course, and I think there was just this. We would all kind of support each other, which was quite strange in architecture school, which is quite competitive. Everyone kind of keeps himself to himself normally, but we were very different. We kind of like all supported each other. We realized we were competing against the whole world, not between the six of us on the course. And within our kind of unit 15, which is where we got our name from. there was, I don't know, 12 people within our unit, and 6 of us actually decided to start something. So there were 6 of us initially, and then 3 of us turned it into a business effectively. But it wasn't so much a kind of down the pub moment. It was more just a slow realization that we wanted to continue doing what we're doing somehow together, and just quite naively kind of went with it, really.
Yeah, I love that. So in terms of the, as you say, transition across, was there anything else that you needed to learn on top of the skills that you already had? Like, what was the sort of learning curve like from moving into more of a creative director role?
I think prior to that, it's important to note that while we did decide to do this anyway, there was a sort of catalyst as well, and it was the commission of our first short film, Jonah, by the BFI, the National Lottery, and Film 4. And this was to put Kibwe, one of my co-founders, on a kind of directorial track to develop him as a creative. And we got the opportunity to create, which is still one of our best projects, really, a film called Jonah, which we got a small team of people to help us with, including Jellyfish Pictures, when they were Jellyfish Pictures, actually. So shout out to them at the time, supporting us and helping us finish the film. So we kind of shared the VFX load on that. But it was that commission really from Film 4 and the BFI that solidified the first project from the studio and gave us a bit of money to play with to create our first short film. And so that was the catalyst, and also the biggest learning curve I think happened on that project. But I think because we supported each other at uni and transitioned to working together and running a company and finding our kind of individual roles and responsibilities was quite a big learning curve. When we were starting out, it's not like we had a natural fit for operations or technical director or MD. We were all creative. Personally, I hated public speaking when I was younger, so I noticed that the company needed a kind of spokesperson, and when we were doing a lot of talks and festivals, I threw myself at any kind of talking opportunities I can get my hands on, really, to practice and improve. And these days, whenever someone compliments me on public speaking, I say it doesn't really come naturally. It's something I've kind of learned and desensitized over time through exposure, really. I also think a huge learning curve for anyone starting a business is understanding how to manage other people. Especially when you're so young, you've only just realized how to kind of like manage your own time. So very quickly you have to pivot and dedicate part of that time to helping others, investing in other people, teaching while still learning yourself the basics in some ways. I think if Kibwe hadn't been so successful in that early stage, we might have found a different structure back then, with me as maybe a studio lead and TD, as I was a bit more technically advanced than the other two, and Kibwe more as the creative lead and Jono more of a DOP. I think it maybe would have kind of landed that way. But yeah, so there was loads of learning happening at that point, and I think the naivety of youth just sort of makes you not worry about it to the same extent you probably would.
Yeah, and energy, no doubt. So Factory 15, you're also on the Nexus Studios director roster. How did that partnership come about, and what kind of projects have you been working on with them?
Yeah, so when we graduated, we instantly got signed to RSA, actually, at the time, Ridley Scott Associates. And that was because of those aforementioned student films that kind of went viral on the internet. And we were with them for a year or two, and then moved to Nexus afterwards for different reasons. But everything kind of came through those early student projects that heavily featured on Vimeo, which was a little more relevant back then than it is now, before things like Instagram took off for creators and things like that. And with Nexus, we started small. I think we were a bit weird for them at first. Architects who like to talk about design, space, and environments for stories to play out in. We talked about world building before it was fashionable for brands. We slowly built a reel that, thanks to many of our own kind of self-funded projects, really, kind of projects outside of Nexus, and collaborations that we could capitalize on commercially. We landed a few adverts that spiraled into more, and then that kind of ended up winning the BBC Olympics advert, which we won a BAFTA for.
Nice.
And we were also developing kind of experiential content internally. We commercialized that with collaborations with Kia Motors, a children's immersive experience featuring their cars. That was a national campaign. And more recently, our sphere work for the UFC and the Exosphere work too. We're one of those directors that doesn't really like waiting, I guess, for the project to come along commercially. So we're constantly making our own work, whether it be a short film, a proof of concept, or an experiential piece or a piece of R&D. We're constantly developing our own content, and we're kind of trying to leverage that creatively. We're not waiting for those kind of commercial projects to kind of land on our doorstep. So it's been a constant iterative improvement of our reel to help win bigger and bigger projects, I guess. So yeah,
it's exciting stuff. And of course, Factory 15, you are celebrating your 15th year this year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What's it like running a studio for 15 years? Big question.
Yeah, where do you want to start with that one?
Are you exhausted?
I think that was a really kind of pivotal moment for us. That was that kind of milestone. We always said we'd have a massive party for our kind of 15th. It's probably our most important birthday. Factory 15 turns 15. So yeah, I mean, we had a big party in the Village Underground. We invited kind of 400 of our friends and family and kind of our closest kind of clients. And we threw a big party. We kind of invited some quite famous kind of music acts to put on a bit of a visual show with us doing the kind of visuals and then the music. We had a big awards ceremony that was really emotional, that we kind of thanked a lot of people along the way that kind of helped us get to where we've got to now. And also just recognizing the sort of ups and downs, really, the successes, but also the tragedies along the way, and of which there's been many. So it was kind of a really kind of poignant moment to sort of say thanks, but also kind of take a beat as well. I think, especially in this day and age, in this economy, it's really difficult to sort of throw these big parties and have these kind of big moments where you kind of just take a beat and recognize what you've done. And I think you have to. What's the point in kind of running your own studio if you can't have moments like that and do things like that? So it was really nice for me to put that on. It took a lot of effort, but yeah, turning 15, that party was a good poignant moment. What it's been like over the past 15 years, it's cliche, but it's a massive journey, isn't it? And I think as the industry changes a lot, which I know we'll come on to perhaps later, I think it's just nice to sort of recognize what you've done and to take a beat.
Definitely. It's such a great milestone, as you say, and I'm sure there isn't a kind of quick or straight answer to this, but is there a kind of formula or secret to 15 years in the industry, especially one that's so tumultuous?
A formula? I wouldn't say there's a formula. I think for us, we've just tried to diversify. We've never really stayed still. Having a few strings to your bow, staying small, being able to expand and shrink quickly, never being complacent or too comfortable. Always kind of pushing forward in a way. I think we've never really grown that large, and I think in our industry, especially recently, that's probably pretty big key to success. Is kind of like is collaborating with larger entities when you have a project too big for your boots, and then I think if you try and rapidly expand around a project, which we probably had opportunities to in the past, would have resulted in inevitable crashes. And I think because we've stayed small as a kind of operation, but creatively very big, as creative directors, because I guess fundamentally the company exists to facilitate the director's work, and that's kind of a bit different to a lot of other studios. We don't really advertise ourselves as a VFX studio. We've never called ourselves that. Obviously, we do lots of animation and VFX, but we've never identified as a VFX studio. We've always been a directing collective, or now more recently a film and experience design studio led by directors. And I think we very rarely work for other people. It's only work that we creatively lead that our studio takes on, and that's allowed us to manage the work in a more sustainable way, perhaps, and also have a lot more control of our identity and what we do. We're not kind of waiting for a director to bring a project here. We're kind of bringing the projects here as directors. So that makes us probably a little bit different, but also maybe more sustainable because we're not taking the risk of growing aggressively to facilitate some of the projects that we might have done if we were a more production-led studio who is kind of more focused on delivering the work than the creative of the work,
Yeah. And we've chatted before today, but I was interested in learning more about your sort of direction now, because you've done quite a few projects in the immersive space, and that seems to be growing exponentially, just generally in the industry. Can you talk us through a bit more about that, your projects, and where Factory is headed?
Yeah, I think to answer that, I kind of have to do a slightly longer-winded way around it, I guess, because we started in architecture and found ourselves working in narrative media, and the simplest way of explaining what we do now is that we combine the two into experiential shared experiences. And I think I think that illustrates our 3 chapters of growth over the years, initially focusing on design, moving more into film and media, and now large format experiences where we need to leverage those design skills, but also narrative skills learned through entertainment. One of our key changes in direction came through self-funded projects. Like I said, that first one, Jonah, the first short film put us on the map as directors and filmmakers, and doing something a bit different but very ambitious. Smaller immersive arts projects like Cocoon, a dome film, led directly onto directing commercial fashion shows for Hallmark. So you never know where these kind of little arts projects can take you and how they can influence your careers, and that's why we kind of tend to always do them, really. And then that led on to working for the Sphere, quite directly. So to be honest, like, each of us founders probably had a different vision for the company to a degree, which is why our portfolio has been quite diverse over the years. The type of work that our studio undertakes year on year is directly correlated to our founders' interests and how active we each are as directors. So before Kibbo was a feature film director, he was working in short films and advertising, and in some years that was the focus for our studio because it was just the primary kind of source of work. He was working in short films and advertising, and that was what we were kind of working on. Now his projects span much longer time frames in feature films, and so I guess it's more my direction is the lead of the company with the immersive media interest that I have, and I've had that for a long time and slowly built that portfolio in kind of location-based entertainment. So that's why we remain quite broad, and that kind of last chapter is the current focus of the business, which is experience design. It's been a kind of 3-chapter journey for what's been the focus of the company. Yeah. And the simplest ways of explaining it is that for me, the kind of the themed entertainment, the location based media projects, this work is it's the ultimate example of work that kind of combines my 2 interests in architecture and narrative media. Because on a lot of these projects, I'm getting to design the not just the screen content, but the screens and the format and the experience, and that's what makes it much more interesting for me as an architect and filmmaker. Is I'm kind of getting to do a bit of both, which is ideal.
Yeah, and from my point of view as well, I'm really interested in immersive, just from a experience point of view, because I've tested quite a few. Not tested, but I've viewed them at Cannes and more recently at Annecy, and there's different levels of intricacies, shall we say, with the graphics. Still a bit of a long way to go for some, but the world that you're kind of transported in, especially in the VR world, it's super interesting for me. I'm not a gamer, so I haven't had that
Well,
experience.
I am. I mean, I am, and I think if I could control if I could have controlled my own fate from the beginning, I think I probably would have ideally worked in the gaming industry.
Oh, really?
The ultimate form of world building. It's the
That's
ultimate.
true.
It's the ultimate form of immersive storytelling. And so
Yeah.
that, and because I am an avid gamer. I game every week. But I think that kind of background in architecture and the theme of our work being around world building and spatial design has kind of helped naturally translate to immersive and experiential industries, really.
Yeah. No,
Natural, slow process of building work in that sector. And I think now, ironically, we're probably more known for that than anything else. Creating those highly designed digital content integrated into architectural and large format screens.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you're open to some gaming clients in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we're already talking to a few recently. Yeah, so I think, but I think doing a game trailer or a game project or a game experience is different from creating a game. So I think in some ways my ideal job would be to create a game.
Yeah.
That's a completely separate industry, and our kind of we're diverse enough as it is. We don't need to kind of add that complexity to the
Yeah.
situation.
You got to stop somewhere for now. No, that's all great. And one thing you didn't mention that's worth mentioning that I saw, that you recently won a BAFTA for Crompton animated series.
Yeah, the project did, and
Yeah.
we were kind of heavy influence on that project.
Yeah.
So yeah, the project did, which was great. I mean, we slightly different to some of our normal work. We got hired to create the world of Crompton in animation for New Pictures and the BBC last year, and it was a episodic TV show for sort of like young adults, kind of mid teens really, and it was a really ambitious project that was translating Alex Wheatl's kind of seminal teenage books into the small screen. And what's fantastic about those books is that they kind of allude to, and they're very graphic, and they allude to these kids communicating their emotions in very different ways. And we tried to really lean into that. So we were kind of directing the animation part of the project and working on the main director for the project. And we came up with a few ideas on how these kids can translate their emotions in different media styles. So one of the kids has a comic book, translates his emotions into comic books, and he kind of draws everything. So we developed a very kind of distinctive comic book style that would kind of style of animation that would communicate that his emotion. One of the kids is really into gaming, so he goes into this gaming world every time he kind of deals with a complex kind of situation, and they're real kind of life complexities. It's kind of like living on gangs, drug culture, being groomed. It's like quite aggressive, high kind of concepts to deal with for kind of mid-teens, really. And that's why the animation allows you to kind of like talk about and show it in a way that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do in a traditional filmmaking process. So, and that was obviously recognized by BAFTA, and then it won Best Children's Scripted. So that's great.
Yeah, amazing to have worked on that. So before we move on to our general industry questions, just want to ask, what's next for Factory 15? I'm sure you can't predict the next 15 years, but what's coming up? What's coming up in the next 6 to 12 months, for instance, or what are you hoping for?
Well, recently we've just hired Kev McRae as ECD, and
Yes.
some people in the industry might know who he is. He previously ran his own kind of 15-year career owning Revenant, which is a Scottish-based animation studio, and he's brought his whole 15-year career portfolio to the Factory 15 IP because he owns it all. So we're effectively kind of like kind of added another director to the director's roster, and then his directing portfolio has now been added to ours. So that's kind of diversified us even more, really. So it's nice to have another previous founder on board who's helping me kind of expand and grow the studio into new areas, but also align to the kind of experiential vision that I have. We want to make strategic partnerships that help us grow deeper into experiential design and expand our studio modestly, amount for now, but enough to allow me to kind of get a few more HODs So I can step back from certain things and focus on the creative aspects of my job personally. I'd love for FF to be a bit more self-sustaining, so I can get back to fully investing in my directorial career, really, and less on the entrepreneurial side.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Got to keep the pipeline going of projects coming in. Thank you for all of that. That's great. So I love to ask leaders about the general insights into your experience with the industry, with the first-hand knowledge of the challenges that we're going through, and hopefully some more positive changes as well. So in running a studio, what have been some of the sort of key challenges, highlights, and learnings really when adapting to the changes in industry?
I think highlights would definitely be some of the early naive years of kind of making short films, traveling the world, and not really caring about money too much. Going to Sundance Film Festival with a nominated short, it was a really productive, creative, magical time, really. And I think obviously winning the BAFTA for the Olympics and the Emmys recently for Sphere has been great to get that kind of level of recognition. Making our first feature film, which was 10 years in the making, called The Kitchen, released on Netflix, which we designed the whole film, Kidway directed. Seeing our work the size of a skyscraper on Sphere, all the talks and festivals and teaching opportunities we've been part of, the list is endless, really. There's some super, super nice highlights there. I think, like culminating in that 15th year party that we mentioned earlier, I think was really nice. But I think, there's been lots of kind of like challenges and tragedies along the way as well that are kind of worth mentioning. I mean, Kidway had a stroke in 2018 that nearly killed him and took aspects of him physically and mentally. And 3 years ago, Jono was tragically killed in a hit and run in LA. So it's been really tough to lose your friends and colleagues, and challenging to continue doing this more or less on my own at the top, when originally there were three of us, right? So I think that they're the kind of the biggest kind of highlights and challenges for sure, which are probably not too business related, but I think they're just the honest kind of answer to that question.
Yeah, hugely impactful. Yeah, I'm very sorry to hear that about Jono. And thankfully I was at your party. It was lovely, and it was a very emotional evening and very touching. And you can see just the depth of Factory 15 and all those relationships you have there.
Glad you saw it. It was nice.
Yeah, it was great. What about taking a screenshot of here and now? I'm sure I speak to a lot of studios a lot of the time, and some are doing better than others. There's still hangovers from various things, including the aftermath of COVID, etc., and decrease in projects. What is it? How do you find it from your side, just generally in terms of projects, and what clients are telling you right now?
There hasn't really been like a technological challenge in the last decade. I think we've been riding this wave of like the same thing for the last sort of 15, 16 years. It's kind of worth backtracking a little bit as well. So I think we existed as a studio at a technological pivot in time, because two things technically happened. It was the Canon Mark II was released, and the i7 processor was released that could power your individual machine to compete with much larger studios to kind of render things, basically, right? And I think if those two things hadn't have happened, we wouldn't have really been able to capitalize on that change. And we've been riding that same technical ecosystem ever since, really. And now it's sort of shifting. And I think that's been the first time in the last 15 years that it has really shifted. But I think in terms of a like the industry-wide thing, I think for me, I think the big company model is dying. In the middle ground, I think people like ILM will ironically grow. I think the bigger company, the biggest of the companies that have the biggest kind of footfall, the Wetters and the ILM, I think they're going to grow. I think the 200 to 400 person studio model seems to be shrinking. Companies need to downsize rather than collapse, in my opinion, and then become more flexible than they are. I think studios holding on for big projects while retaining that staff count and being scared to go down to say 50 people again is wild to me. I mean, that, I'd rather survive than cling on to a company structure you feel the pressure to maintain and run the risk of dying. I think that's what's happened to a lot of studios over the last few years, is that you grow to a point where you think that's your identity, where that I am now a 400-person studio. This is how we operate. These are our pipelines. And then when the kind of mammoth projects don't sustain that anymore, you die. I mean, what's wrong with going back down to 50 people and changing the pipeline? For me, that's what I'm seeing and being confused about personally. I think that what this means is that there's more willingness and opportunity for collaboration than ever. That's what we're seeing across the board, and certainly with the people we're talking to now. We're certainly feeling it with experiential. More and more large companies are coming to us for specialist collaborations. And in turn, we have potentially more partners to collaborate with on our own larger directorial work, which we, like feature films of Kidway, for example. We have more people to potentially partner with that, and build those kind of relationships on a kind of two-way footfall. I think there's suddenly this opportunity for greater collaboration than there ever has been, because big companies are downsizing and small companies are becoming more powerful through specialisms, but also through being able to do more with smaller people in today's technical ecosystem. So my main point is, I think it's just been, I'm seeing a shrinkage of companies, but also the ones that don't adapt and shrink, they're the ones that are dying. People like Axis, people like Jellyfish, they were holding on to big projects and they couldn't downsize in time. They weren't flexible enough to sort of downsize or change their identity, their model to be 50 people.
Yeah, and just having such large overheads as well. You have a lovely studio in London, but I'm sure it costs a pretty penny to keep that going. And I think generally in our industry there's that cash flow problem, especially if a project suddenly cancels or is majorly delayed.
Yes.
What's your kind of take on that? And is there a way of protecting ourselves?
There's no protection there. We suffer the same issues as everyone else does. There's no even no matter how big your company is, we try and sustain a certain amount, but we're still an X amount per month studio, right? And I think you still have to kind of bring in that money every month, and it's quite a lot. So, even when you're sort of 15, 16 people, anyone that runs their own company will know what that costs, and how much you kind of need to bring into the studio to maintain that. And I think it's worth noting that, like, until about 2.5 years ago, we didn't do any outreach or sales. And we just kind of won projects as directors and brought that work to the studio, and that kind of fed the machine of the size of company that we were. And it's only really been in the last 2 years that we're now doing that. And I think everyone is kind of in the same situation, and there's a lot less work in the world now. And I think that the cash flow is always going to be a concern. We're seeing people kind of trade cash flow for profit margin in the version of kind of acquisitions and mergers. That's happening a lot now as well. A lot of kind of companies are being acquired or merged or forming these larger groups, and all that does is replace one stress with another stress, and all of a sudden you're not in control anymore. So I think right now, while the cash flow is definitely the biggest stressor of from a company founder's perspective like me, there's not really like much you can do about that, apart from we always try and have 3 to 6 months cash in the bank. That's the kind of gold. 6 months plus is gold standard for us. And I think, the more you can kind of set yourself up for that, the better. I think what happened to us was that we changed our bread and butter a little bit, from industries like advertising and architecture that have an immediate kind of return. These are sort of, they immediately, when you get an opportunity, they immediately happen or they don't, and they last sort of 4 weeks to 3 to 4 months, and that is immediate kind of like cash flow solution. And then we decided to push more into experiential, and that was our main target from a sort of acquisitions perspective and a sales perspective. The problem is with that industry is that you're talking about projects for Halloween 2028, Halloween 2027, these kind of events, and because the landscape of that is much longer sort of time frames, and that's very hard to adjust to when you all of a sudden you turn off the tap of the shorter form work. So that can have a huge impact on your cash flow, and we found that last year. And then we were like, whoa, okay, we need to have this bit of a balance here before we go all guns blazing into one sector that has a very different model. And that was just naivety of not knowing exactly the sort of timeframes and the financial models of some of those larger projects. But the benefit of that is that when you have a larger project like that, you have foresight, you have cash flow, you have planning. So you can actually plan ahead, actually in 6 months' time, I've got this, and so much and so forth. So I think, and also the projects tend to last longer as well. So instead of a 3-week to 3-month project, you've kind of got a 1-year project. And then that is, so that's what we're trying to do to alleviate those cash flow concerns, is kind of have a balance of the sort of cash flow supporting bread and butter work with these kind of longer projects that can feed the studio for longer, and you can plan around them a little bit more.
Yeah, a lot of juggling by the sounds of it as well. So thinking about the industry in general, or what you've been up to at Factory, has anything in particular excited you lately?
Yeah, I think just to keep on the theme of experiential, so for years we've kind of been working in the experiential industry around different projects, kind of artistic projects, cultural projects, branded projects, work for the Sphere. But only really in the last year or year and a half or 2 years have we really been actually trying to be part of that industry, like connecting with the different organizations, Experience UK, T, WXO, going to all of the different conferences, IAPA, etc. And I think what we've just realized is how big that sector is, and how many interesting, cool companies are kind of working in that sector, and also just how much more friendly that sector is than any other sector. And I think like in advertising, architecture, VFX, it's a race to the bottom line, and there's still components of that, but it's just people aren't as nice. Like literally, the people that you meet in the experiential economy, because it's a much more complex industry, because it's a combination of architecture, engineering, technologists, working on kind of fancy new LED tech, and and then you have all the animation and content production as you would a normal VFX kind of pipeline at the back of all of that as well. And so I think it's very collaborative. People are always willing to hear you out and happy to introduce to you. And I think I kind of naively thought that we were just kind of either known or kind of already in that sector, but actually taking the time to invest in it and meeting people that are really at the top of their game in that sector, and also realizing we have a place there has been really nice. It's been really kind of we're coming at this again from a different angle, and we came into advertising from a different angle, and we're coming into this with a different angle. We're coming at it from a much kind of higher content spec than most other people, and that helps us stand out than anyone else in the sector, really. So we're finding that it's a really friendly industry, and we also have a natural fit and a natural home within it, which feels great. Trips like last month, I went to Japan on a big government trade mission and met some fantastic people there. One of them was Team Lab, who people might know, is creating these kind of large immersive arts experiences. They're actually 1,000-person company, and that surprised me because you just wouldn't think that kind of company would be 1,000 people. They're actually the biggest company of the sector, like in the whole world. There's no other company that's quite as large as them in terms of a experiential agency like that. Even there's a few out there, but they're the biggest. That surprised me of how big you can actually get, and being a company like that was super surprising and nice to hear. So I think I'm generally just really excited by that sector more than anything else right now, to be honest. And I think tech, I think the stuff about tech that's exciting. I think there's probably a whole separate sort of area of discussion to talk about the tech. So I'll leave it there for what I find exciting at the moment.
I love Japan, so I'm jealous that you were there recently. So you were a student not that long ago, but maybe when you were a student, there was more of a clear path of where you were going to go, especially initially. I've been speaking to quite a few students, and there's a lot of uncertainty. Change in tech obviously comes into that, so it can be quite a confusing, concerning time for those about to graduate, especially, and hoping for their first role in the industry. What would be your advice for them generally?
I think like the previous advice for within the context of VFX was to specialize, become the best rigger, the best animator, the best environment designer, etc. But I think with the tools changing so fast now and the hybrid AI workflows becoming more viable, I think the advice I give and see others giving is to become a much more of a generalist. We might need less specialists in the future, and AI assistants will become a lot more common, I think. So learning the whole process on how AI can be utilized within different parts of that process, adopting into different pipelines, and by being early adopters, I think is wise. So even if you have a kind of like specialist interest, keep it broad and roll with how things land in the next couple of years, and changes are coming faster than ever. Becoming the world's best tracking artist or the most competent rigger is for me a bad investment. And I think those things will just become automated and tweaked manually among many other things. But I think ultimately, I do believe in kind of having the kind of broad knowledge of things is going to be the best kind of advice. And also I think a lot of studios are not early adopters, is what I'm kind of seeing elsewhere. Some fantastic studios out there, they haven't even touched AI. They're kind of like sticking with the traditional tools for now. So I think when you're a student, we certainly did it when we were capitalizing on this sort of technological changes of the time, abusing the kind of the new cameras that came out and combining that with VFX that was easier than ever to set up and create. I think as a student, you have to be an early adopter, because whether a company wants to take that risk or change their pipelines is up to them. But I think that it's not a fad. It's coming. It's here. So be a specialist. Don't just rely on Gen AI. Really delve into kind of hybrid pipelines. There's a lot happening right now with combination approaches to kind of keeping the control with certain aspects of traditional tools, and then kind of rendering with AI or whatever it might be. So I think there's we're certainly playing around with it, and not just playing around with it. We're delivering projects with these hybrid pipelines in mind. One of those projects that we were in Japan launching last month was a completely AI hybrid pipeline for a big experience that we created out there. So, and it was using the same artists with the same skills, just simplifying parts of the process and delivering a product that we couldn't have delivered for that scope, 2 years ago. So I think more opportunities are coming than, and I think students need to be kind of capitalizing on these things more than ever, and not specializing in kind of traditional tools.
Yeah, makes sense. That seems to be what a lot of people I'm talking to are saying as well. So, how do you personally feel about AI? I know you said that you're using it. Do you feel like we're in the kind of crux of all the hype, and a lot of people are saying it is just another tool, and then others are saying it's actually taking people's jobs. What's your take on that?
Everyone's talked about this loads, right? And I think for me, it's like a whole separate genre of filmmaking, to be honest. But even within the existing genre of film and VFX, it's a no-brainer. It's a colossal industry shifter, both creatively and in terms of production pipelines. Films will still be films, I think, but there's currently a bit of a pushback in the artistic intent of cinema and actors, and I think some fundamentals will never really change. Stories will still be told with real people forever. But maybe just for the lucky elite in the future. And in my opinion, the VFX industry is at an obvious stage of rapid transformation. I think I always say to people that if you're going to look back at the credits list from films like Avatar and the Avengers Endgame, and I just don't think we'll believe that it needed thousands of people to make a single film. And I always say that I think the better question is, should it take 1,000 people to make those films? I think the industry has to ask itself that question sometimes. I think, in 2020, I think 2024 will be known as the period of technical complexity, like the peak of technical complexity within VFX-based filmmaking. And it will only get simpler and less technical and more streamlined than ever. And to me, that's progress, right? You can't deny the negative impacts that it's going to have on those technical jobs in our industry that are lost. But to me, unless you're making an AI film, and that's the point, it's the over-reliance on it in the early, concept stages that I feel is killing creativity and having a negative impact on what we should be a really kind of creative period of play. And I think, I've already become a bit numb to AI scripts and AI concept art, and its value and intent kind of gets lost. But no, I think it's not overhyped. I think it's naive to think that. I think it's fine not to be an early adopter, but you got to be exploring some of the AI assisted pipelines, as the possibilities are massive, and it's only going to enable small teams like us to do more, being able to compete with larger studios who might inevitably downsize, except ILM and Meta and Weta and people like that. So I think I always ask the question, should it be this complex? Should it take this many people to do this, or is it just the natural swell point of the industry, where it needed this many people to create this stuff, and there was always going to be a simplification over time? This just happens to be a potential radical simplification through AI. But I think you can't talk about AI and job losses and just look at it from the perspective of this job that I do is going to be replaced by AI, right? I think you have to look at it as a bit broader and a bit more kind of the kind of political and financial market to understand what's going on. For example, the reason why there's a lack of films at the moment is because philanthropists and people with money are not putting their money there, right? They're putting all of their money in AI companies, in data centers that are being invested in. That's where the world economy is going now, right? And that forces less money in the creative industries, in the arts. People with money are not spending their money there anymore. That's the biggest reason why there's going to be less jobs in the industry. Not because of this tool now replaces me as an animator. That's not happening yet. Not really. So it's bigger than that, and you kind of have to think bigger to understand what's going on a little bit, because when you see all these closures happening of studios and artists, being 8,000 jobs at Meta, 5,000 jobs at Epic Games, blah 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 blah. AI is not replacing those 5,000 people. It's because there's no money in the industry. That's what's happening. So I think, to me, there's going to be a huge crash in that. And again, I could talk about this for a long time, but, if you look, because I like looking through the history lens with these things sometimes, and I like to do a lot of reading about it. And when you have these kind of big, infrastructure projects throughout humanity, right? Think about the Industrial Revolution in the mid 19th century. Think about the telecommunication network, when the whole world was wired up with electricity and telecommunication. When you think about the railway networks, these were like worldwide industry projects happening at kind of government scales. After every single one of them, there was a financial crash. Just because of the upfront investment that's needed to do it with the people that have the money, right? Not just the governments, but the people that have the money. And the problem with now what's happening is that all of those previous investments lasted decades. The railways last a certain amount of time, right? The telecommunication networks, they last a certain amount of time. The lifespan of these graphics cards burning at 24/7 is 3 years. So these data centers are being built with a 3-year life cycle, trillions going into them, by the way. And there's going to be a financial crash bigger than anyone has ever seen, I think, after this swell of AI. So when you say, is the AI bubble going to burst? Not quite. but there's going to be this financial crash, I think, when we've built all these data centers, because that's what has happened again and again and again in human history, and nobody knows how they're going to make their money back yet from these data centers. And I think that the financial lifespan of them, I don't think anyone's talking about that enough yet. So, and this for me is the top level thinking of the AI problem that isn't animator gets replaced by AI tool, you know?
Yeah, that's super interesting. I listened to a podcast the other day with Goldman Sachs, who are obviously monitoring things like that very closely, and just seemed that they just are similar to us, just kind of wait and see what happens, can't fully predict. But the financial aspect of it is definitely something that we're all waiting on with bated breath, not to mention all the legal cases that are out there at the moment, seeing what happens.
Yeah. And I think, like, where does it end? And it's a good question, right? Because I think, where does it end? What do I mean by that? So where do the end point is either something like Skynet and Terminator, and people laugh about it, right? But you're giving these things control of the military, and all it takes is one bad prompt to slightly be misinterpreted, and then you've got something crazy that happens, right? You've already got AI trying to preserve itself by making backups of itself when it's been told to delete itself and things like that. There's all these stories happening out there, right? So there's one of the few things that can happen as there's even going to be some sort of incident, call it a rogue AI, call it an incident with AI where something bad happens, right? Or there's going to be some aggressive job loss situation that causes a financial collapse. The research says that if 10% of the population, don't quote me on that, it's 10 to 15, it's a small percentage of the population that are unemployed, then your economy collapses, basically. So we're talking about 50 people losing their jobs, 50% of people losing their job. That's not that, we don't have to get anywhere near that for a society to collapse, right? So it'll either be a localized society collapse that kind of happens either in the West or in China, or whichever kind of side builds their AI the best first, right? There's going to be an incident has to happen to force worldwide regulation, because we know that a government country by country regulation isn't going to work, because you're competing against China, right? For these things, and everyone's trying to build AGI and build the digital god first, right? And nobody really cares about the consequences because someone else is going to do it, and that's the pressure. That's the narrative that we keep hearing, right? But there has to be an incident that happens that forces governments to combine to form a worldwide regulation. That's the only way, and it might be regulating certain types of jobs. So you can't replace certain types of jobs with AI, and that's a regulation. It might be it can't exist in this format in the military. Whatever incident forces whatever thing will be the basis of how the regulations are kind of formed. But I think that's the only endpoint. There has to be one catastrophe for us to react globally to this kind of thing.
Oh God! Well, look forward to that then. Thanks, Paul. Thanks.
You told me to go there. I've got a lot to say about this, and you asked the question, so
yeah, fair enough. I did. It's better. I like to get these perspectives.
I just can't have the conversation of AI replacing animation artists, because that doesn't exist for me right now. It exists elsewhere. This conversation for me, if you go down the rabbit hole, it takes you elsewhere. To where the actual problem is, and it's not AI software replacing AI artists. That's not how it is. That's not what's happening.
Interesting. Lots of food for thought there. Thank you. Well, we're running out of time, but I always ask this last question. It's quite an open, general question, but with everything that we've talked about and where things are heading, what are your hopes for the future of our industry? That could be next year, 5 years, 50.
Yeah, I think, well, just to lean on what I said last, I hope investment comes back into the creative industries. I think this is the biggest thing. So that's my biggest hope, really. You know, I, I also like making the analogy of, like, if Ali's kebab shop can suddenly have the same production value as Coke in terms of advertising with AI, then how does someone like Coke stand out? They go back to craft, they go back to human-made things, and I think we're gonna see a lot of that happening in the creative sector. I think going back to kind of human-made things and it looking like it's been made by a human, the craft, the behind-the-scenes aspects, those kind of stories. I'm already seeing it in aspects of animation and advertising already. There was a fantastic spot for the Winter Olympics for the BBC that we actually pitched on. That was won by a great company that did this whole stop frame animation with fire, and it was just fantastic. And that won lots of awards. And the BTS on that is just amazing. It combining lots of craft and tools and handmade things and digital tools. I don't think 3D animation or VFX has the same handcrafted nostalgia, perhaps, as other sorts of crafts and tools. So I think those pipelines will, in my opinion, change forever. But I think we will see. I'm hopeful that we'll see an influx of kind of human-made things in contrast, and I think at the very top, where brands can afford to do it, with ever-increasing human labor costs, basically. So, my worry linked to that hope is that I think that might exist just for the top percentage of the industries. And I think it's going to be harder than ever to get to the top position. If you can't learn your craft in music videos and traditional sort of methods that you might get noticed in the past, then and making these kind of short films is very expensive, then I just worry that it might be hard to get noticed enough to get to that top percentage of people that are still doing handcrafted things. But I do think there's going to be a turn to value of human-made things. I think there's going to be a hallmark for that exact thing, like a stamp of approval, similar to any kind of hallmark, really, that it's not been touched with AI. It's just been made by human beings, and I think we'll probably devalue everything that doesn't have that hallmark, I think, in the future. So I think right now everyone's playing with it. It all looks very scary, and I think my hope for the future is that investment returns to the creative sector, and that the hallmark for human-made things becomes the new normal in the creative sector and in our industry.
Love that. Okay, thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate your time, and let's chat again soon.
Cool. Thank you very much, Hayley. Talk to you soon. Thanks for featuring me on your podcast.
You're welcome.
Cheers, guys. Bye.